hospitality and wine go hand in hand.
Yeah.
I mean, it's rare you see, some great hospitality, fine hospitality without engaging with wine somewhere. As I like to say, if it wasn't for prohibition here in the United States, we probably wouldn't be in the wine business as a family.
Crisis comes opportunities.
Yes.
Welcome to Business in Families, the podcast where family legacy meets leadership challenges. I'm Alex Mendez, a family enterprise advisor with over 18 years of experience helping business families worldwide navigating the complexities of generational transition, governance, and how they can professionalize themselves. In each episode, you will hear real stories, hard decisions, and valuable lessons from families who, like yours, are working to build trust, grow their companies, and preserve their legacy across generations. If something here resonates with your family or your business, and you'd like to explore it more deeply, I'm here to help you. In today's episode, I had the privilege of speaking with Peter Mondavi Jr., a third-generation member of the legendary Mondavi wine dynasty in Napa Valley. The Mondavi family is known worldwide for revolutionizing the California wine industry. But behind the legacy is also a complex family history that includes a split between branches due to differences in vision. Today, Peter and his brother lead their branch of the leading business with a clear vision to preserve their legacy and prevent history from repeating itself. In this conversation, Peter shares how his side of the family has implemented governance structures, family agreements, and long-term planning tools to ensure continuity across generations. His story powerfully reflects on what it takes to evolve, rebuild trust, and protect both the family and the business. If you're looking for real-world insight into navigating succession, conflict resolution, and sustainability in the family business, this episode is not to be missed. Welcome to Families in Business.
So let's begin by a little bit of story. So since I recall, everything began with your grandparents, Cesare, and your grandmother that emigrated from Italy over to the States. So how did that begin, their incursion into the wines and the wineries many years ago, almost 100 years ago?
Yeah, it was pretty fascinating because they did immigrate over, just got married in Italy, 1908. Very modest means. They had a third grade education. Parents were sharecroppers. So they came over to the United States in late 1908 for just the opportunity of what the United States could offer. So they came over, immediately made their way to northern Minnesota, which is near the Canadian border. Reason they went there, twofold. One is they already had family and friends that had previously immigrated and settled in that part of the country. And two, that's back then it was a very big active iron range, iron mining. So a lot of work available for those willing to do the laboring type work as required in the mines. So that's why they came over and settled there. My grandfather, not too crazy about toiling in the iron mines, started a saloon with a partner. And that seemed to be going, saloon, a bar. That seemed to be okay, going along okay. My grandmother ran a boarding house for about 16 to 18 Italian miners, laborers there, but she ran a very tight ship there. So both of them worked very, very hard. Prohibition set in here in the United States. There it set in a little bit about a year early. So 1919, Prohibition was coming in. The saloon business obviously was getting shut down, so parlayed it into a grocery store.
Or maybe some challenges came up.
Yes.
And the back door on the a little bit of wine and booze, and on the front door they had the drugstore.
Absolutely. But as far as our history that we know of, I don't think they were doing any of that. However, what they did do to take advantage of the situation, my grandfather's in the grocery store dealing with fresh produce. So the tight-knit Italian community, small community there, rallied around my grandfather to go to to California to source wine grapes so they could make their own wine, their homemade wine in their garage or their cellars or whatever. So he took the train to California in 1919, did some deals on grapes, shipped them back in the rail car. Zinfandel was the primary varietal being shipped, which is actually very, very closely related to the Primitivo and a grape from Italy. So the Italians were very familiar with that, made their homemade wine. He did this for several years, several harvests.
Prohibition was still in place in the States?
Well, in 1920, it officially came in for the whole United States.
Okay.
In 1919, I think there's influence. It was starting to happen in Minnesota and that part of the country. So 1920 is when Prohibition came in. And so in 1922, decided there is a good future in building up this business of shipping fresh wine grapes to home winemakers throughout the country. So in 1922, moved the whole family to California, and
what an adventure for those times.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about how they traveled by train at that time. Was quite an adventure.
Oh, it was quite the adventure. And then with 4 kids in tow, so across the United States, like you said, via train. But they settled in Central Valley, California, and continued that business and became very successful. And as important, it introduced my grandparents to wine, to vineyards, to grapes, to winemaking, to that whole community. Prior to that, my grandparents had no exposure to wine business or winemaking or anything. So, as I like to say, if it wasn't for Prohibition here in the United States, we probably wouldn't be in the wine business as a family.
Crisis comes opportunities.
Yes. So that's how we got involved with the wine business. And then after repeal, my grandfather got involved with at a management level, the president of a winery in Central Valley, and then purchased the Charles Krug Winery, the winery we now own in Napa Valley, purchased it in 1943.
But let me give a pause here.
Sure.
So where did this idea of buying a winery like Charles Krug, which is, by the way, the oldest winemaking in the United States?
So the oldest in Napa Valley. There's Buena Vista, I think, is a couple years older, but very close.
So where did this idea of your grandfather trying to become an entrepreneur and buy a winery and begin to make his own wine? It came from your father, your uncle, the idea? How did it come through?
At first, to get in more of the details, after repeal, which is 1933, my grandfather, Cesare, had a very good relationship with the banks. He was a highly respected, regarded business person. Not a winemaker, but a business person. So after repeal, the banks had some wineries, that they probably took over because the business went south. And so they invited my grandfather to be president of one of them in Lodi area, Central Valley, to become the president, and had they gave him an equity position in it as well. So there he built up, ran the business side of the winery. That exposed my dad, Peter, my uncle, Robert, to the wine business, to winemaking, that whole aspect. So I think, and it's a very good question of yours, why did we continue in that? I think it was the generation 2, my dad, Peter, my uncle, Robert, who really wanted to embark in the wine business. And that's how actually my grandparents had involvement with a winery in Napa Valley, a partnership right after repeal in 33 as part of the deal with in Central Valley. And then from there, that gave us a footprint in Napa Valley. and then discovered Charles Krug was for sale. So 10 years later, 1943, is one of my grandparents bought the Charles Krug Winery, and it's been in our family ever since.
So when that happened, how was that relationship and the division of roles and responsibilities between your dad and your uncle and well, Cesare, your granddad was still alive. So
Yes.
how was that? How did they divide it, their responsibilities, how to run the business?
So it's before my time. So the stories that have been passed down and talking with my dad and others during that time frame, 1943, my grandfather was obviously the financial backer. He was the supporter. He did not take a direct managerial role at Charles Krug. Think of more on the board of directors or that kind of level.
Or the head of the family.
What's
I
that?
thought the board of directors, the head of the family, say, "Okay, guys,
Yes.
I'm here.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
yourselves."
I don't think there was only a formal board to stamp the papers, but yes, he was the head of the family, and would offer guidance, support, the finance, of course. Robert did not go off to the war. My dad was in the war, stationed for part of the time in England. So Dad was outside of the initial part of Charles Krug.
Okay.
Even though he was there, he was on leave and came back to home, and he was there in San Francisco when the deal was consummated to purchase Charles Krug. So he went back. So Robert then was basically the general manager of the Charles Krug Winery at that point. When Dad came back after the war and joined Robert at Charles Krug Winery, Dad was on the production side, the winemaking side, the vineyard side. Robert was still general manager, but more in the sales and marketing side of the operation. So that's kind of how it got divided up. And I think it was a reflection of their personalities, of their interests as well.
So when your dad came back from the war and decided, okay, well, I want to pursue also the family business and go into the winery, how did it create some tensions with your uncle in terms of, I've been here handling the whole thing, and now comes my younger brother, and we're going to be dividing the operations in this sense and the ownership also. How did your uncle and your dad feel about it? How do you handle that?
I don't think there was any issue at that point. Reason being is they both went to school together. They were 1 year apart. Roberts was a year older. So they were in college, Stanford University, together, separated by a year. They both majored in econ. However, Dad took one semester, went across the bay to University of California, Berkeley, which this is in the mid-later 1930s and pre-war. And so he went across the bay to UC Berkeley, which at that point was the referred to as UC Davis today, University of California, Davis, which is where all the main winemaking research education center is here in California. That was actually at Berkeley back in those days. So Dad went there, worked under Professor Cruz, who was one of the professors in enology, the science of winemaking, and studying under him chemistry, fermentation science, things like that for a semester. So Dad was actually, had some formal education with respect to winemaking, which would complement, Robert's experience, Dad's experience, before school and before going off to war. So, at that point, I think it worked out fairly well because Robert was much more focused on sales, marketing, exceptional at that, and Dad was extremely meticulous and driven, which is what you need in winemaking.
Okay, to make the best of the best.
Really, at that point, it's complementary.
To make the best of the best in terms of whatever product, but in this case, is wine.
Yes.
So, jumping, I don't know, 10 years ahead, what happened between the relationship of your dad and your father in terms of vision? Because he won out of the Charles Krug operations, and began this Robert Mondavi Vineyard itself, right across the street almost.
Yes. So how this evolved was a divergence of strategy, I think, let's call it priorities. So Robert had a priority of growth, quality and growth. A growth such that it was difficult to sustain such a growth with a family-held business. So there are some noises made about, getting outside investors, partners to finance the growth. Whereas the balance of the family, the priority was 100% family owned, versus Robert's priority of, growth. And then, okay, if we have some dilution in the family, so be it. These are generalities, but that's the general gist of it. And then in 1965, actually, Robert left on a 6-month sabbatical from the winery to cool things down, I guess.
Yeah.
Between these two conflicting directions or priorities.
Or personalities also.
What's that?
And personalities also.
Yes. And at that point, Robert started to look around and found some partners interested in investing with him. So the following year, 1966, is when he started the Robert Mondavi Winery with some partners.
But that conflicted with the family business, because now you're competing in the same marketplace. Didn't it generate some tensions in the family there?
Yes, it generated some tension. It didn't come to a complete head at that point, but there was some tension. The use of the name, was part of it. But Dad, the first harvest for Robert Mondavi in 1966, it's my understanding, was actually crushed and fermented at Charles Krug.
Okay.
Wow. So there's some support and collaboration at that point. The real part, which is, I don't think is going to be surprising for any family business member listening to this who has multi-generational experience, is Robert still owned a percentage of Charles Krug Winery.
Okay.
And the big disagreement came about is, what is the value of that portion? So that's really the biggest disagreement and in the whole relationship.
And unfolded eventually, maybe Robert selling his part to whatever price, and you buying the whole thing in terms of Charles Krug, your branch in that sense.
Yeah, so we ultimately negotiated a deal where we purchased his, there's some cash, there's some land, vineyard land, swapping of assets, stock for, cash and vineyard land. And so that's how Dad and our branch of the family took over 100% ownership of Charles Krug. That happened in 1976, so a decade after Robert's departure from the winery.
You were almost ending high school at that time. We're almost the same age.
I was graduating in 76. Yes.
Yeah. Me too. So how? Tell me a little bit about your branch and your family. You have brothers, sisters, and how do you got involved in the wine business with your dad?
So one brother Mark, and then myself, and then our branches are equal owners. We just literally just grew up around the winery, at the winery, every summer, grade school, and even during high school, doing work at the winery, odd jobs, in the vineyard, in the lab, in the cellar. even, as I think I started as 8 years old, working like 4 hours a day, a few days a week, just doing menial whatever stuff. And so we were exposed to the business, many aspects of the wine, at least more the production side, the winemaking side, and the vineyard side, and literally just grew into it. So, went off to college, studied, engineering because I would just,
Okay.
I liked
Very
engineering, and
structured
it's something I can get out of, I could actually, manage to get through college in. So I did that. But immediately after I came back, to the winery.
So you never questioned yourself, I'm going to work out of the family business. I'm going back to the winery and pursue my passion along with my dad.
Yeah, it was interesting because there was not really discussed. It wasn't, maybe there was some implication in there, but it's just like, okay, that's what one does. Which in hindsight, I don't think is the right way to do it. And is what we're practicing with our kids is, go out, experience the world, stand on your own 2 feet, work for others, advance your position. Then at some point, if you want to come back, then okay, well, let's talk about that.
Well, what about Mark? What happened with him?
So very similar. So he went off to Davis and then UC, or actually Sacramento State, studied a little bit of winemaking, some marketing as well, but came straight back to the winery just like I did. And we had, various roles. Mark tended more towards the vineyard side of things, the operational side of things. I tended more towards, sales, marketing, finance, part of the business. So that's kind of how we worked up. Dad was overseeing, he was president and overseeing the main operations. So he was much more entwined in the daily activity than my grandfather was with respect to my dad and Robert.
And is your brother still involved in the operations of the company or not anymore?
So we've evolved over time. We have restructured our governance. So from a casual, founding, family business, which is basically just kind of family running the thing, to a much more formalized structure. So board of directors, for my brother Mark and I are on the board. Our daughter Leah's on the board. And actually, Mark recently stepped off of his board. He's 4 years older than I am, so he stepped off. So two of his daughters are on the board. I'm on the board. My daughter Leah's on the board, and then we have our president, who is a non-family member, on the board. Okay. And then we have two independent outside board members. One being the chairperson. Both of them have extensive experience in the wine business. So we formalized it, and then we have an executive leadership team, president, non-family, and CFO, HR, COO, pretty classic, all non-family members. So we've evolved from, the more informal family structure to something more formalized.
So what made the decision in your family to decide it's time now to be more formal and put some policies inside? What happened? What triggered it in that moment?
So I think really we were talking about it, but Dad passed away in 2016. He was 101, and he still remained president until he was 99.
Wow.
Yes. So, we started talking about, and Dad had done an exceptional job on estate planning from a financial standpoint. Did not really address the governance. So Mark and I got together, and we weren't going to pick between either one of us. Dad was not going to do that. Kind of a stalemate or whatever. So that kind of helped the transition into a formal governance. We actually started a advisory board.
And what was
So,
that exactly? Your
yeah,
dad was still alive, or he already passed away?
he was, it is, in the last year or so of his life.
Okay.
So he was a little bit aware of it, but not fully aware of it. So my brother Mark, myself, and then each of us, picked another advisor.
Okay.
So we had four there, and then we had at that point we had a let's call it an up and coming CEO.
Okay.
He more COO type. So he was on that as well.
It was like
So
part of the succession plan, sort of call it that way. Say, let's bring somebody from outside, put it in the operations part of it, and
yes,
let's try it if it works or not. You build
yes,
confidence in that, and trust is built in that sense. And
yeah,
eventually, could be or not the
yeah.
CEO of the company.
Yeah, so that's what he did. So he's CEO. So he sat on this advisory board. So it was strictly advisory, no fiduciary responsibilities or anything. And it was actually kind of a trial balloon for us to move on to a more formal board structure, fiduciary board.
Okay.
What the biggest benefit and outcome from this advisory board or advisory group was to get a family business consultant engaged with the family and with management employees who've been there for a while to really do an assessment and recommendation for a for future governance. And in that was the more traditional formal board setup and moving to a strictly non-family ELT.
Uh-huh.
Mark and I are still fully employed by the winery,
Yeah.
still quite active in it, but having a non-family ELT in there, and then a board which was represented by the family members, the president, and outsiders as well. And then also the board, we keep it, I implied earlier, but my branch owns 50% of the winery. Mark's branch owns 50%. So we keep the board structure, at least family representation, 50-50 on both sides.
Okay. So if you have to define what are the advantages and disadvantages of putting these governance processes, what would you say about it?
I think the advantage is you have to have the right personalities in the ELT and the board, is to cut through family
Issues.
issues, whatever. I could use other words, but I don't know who the audience is. But really to moderate that and the personalities there. I think that's a important, not the only thing, but the important function of the board and the ELT in particular, the president and our COO are heavily involved with that aspect with the family and stuff.
What about tackling the challenges of a business itself? Because now it's a lot more competitive than it was before, or 30, 40 years ago, the wine business, not only in the States, but in the world. So had it helped you, the board, the fiduciary board, and the advisory board, in terms of strategic decisions, tackle those new challenges that the business itself has?
Yeah, I mean, right now, the wine business and let's call it the alcoholic beverage business is being challenged like I haven't seen before.
Okay.
And I'm not talking about the United States only, but I'm talking about the world. So just to deviate from our family discussion and just pure business, the U.S. wine industry was on a 30-year growth path. Every year growth, not huge, 1, 2, 3, 4% per year for 30 years. And then, right around COVID, COVID, there was an anomaly there, but sometime around then, forces started to come together. There's, if you ever watched or remember the 60 Minutes thing on the French paradox. That was back in the 1990s, I believe, where, the French eat all kinds of cheese but they don't have the heart issues we have here. But, guess what? They drink a lot of red wine. So the health benefits of drinking red wine. Now those have been, for whether right or wrong, somewhat debunked. So consumption of alcohol now at any level, people are stating it's not healthy for you. I would have different arguments. That's a different discussion. So you have the health issues are not there anymore. The health benefits are not there anymore. The baby boomers are huge consumers of wine, but consuming less as we age.
Okay.
The younger group, Gen Zs, 21 to 35 or so, are not picking up wine like I think our generation did. There's a multitude of options out there. Old days you had wine, spirits, and beer. Now you have those three, but you have RTDs, ready to drink cocktails. You have the cannabis. You have the hard seltzers. Just a myriad of alternative adult beverages out there. Competing for a share of mouth. So anyway, those are kind of the fundamentals. It's not an economic issue. It's not a recession issue or anything like that. There's some systemic issues that I think are going to be longer term than past downturns in the industry. Anyway, that's a side note.
But going back to the governance, the decision making, a best practice for family businesses is put some structure, have an advisory boards, because he's going to help you tackle these challenges with personalities outside, with knowledge from outside, maybe youngsters in your board that can tell you what is the behavior, or try to figure it out, new ways to approach the market in that sense. So I would say, and taking your words in account, it's an advantage to have an advisory board, because I heard some families say, I'm hesitant to put in a board because I'm going to lose control. What would you say to that remark in specific?
Well, first of all, I think the outside board members and ELT have been a tremendous resource, especially during these challenging times. As far as losing control, couple of things. One is, how is your board made up? Is it majority of family or majority outside? We started with majority outside and then transitioned to majority family on the board. So there's 4 family on the board, 3 outsiders. Well, one's a president. Okay. So total of 7 there. So the family still has control of the board if the family is unified on a topic, on issue. And then you get to the shareholders. Shareholders, of course, vote in the board members. That's their main function. And if the board wanted to sell major assets, a piece of property, we have a lot of land here in Napa Valley. If they wanted to sell a piece of property, that the board can recommend the sale of a property, but it requires the vote of the shareholders to do that. So we still have control at a very high level.
And how as a family are you handling the stewardship of the next generation? Your kids, your nieces and nephews from the kids from Mark. How are you motivating them to be still engaged, be part of this dynasty, Mondavi dynasty name, and but maybe never work at it? So how are you fostering that?
So it started very young, very early, just literally exposing our kids to the winery, to wines, to, enjoyment of wines, going out to dinner, wine and food, exposing them to all aspects of the winery. Like myself, they weren't quite as young when they started, but they would work at the winery frequently during summers. various jobs, things like that, to get, more exposure to the winery. What my wife and I wanted to do is to make sure they had a thorough understanding of what they own or will own, soon, through gifting and things like that.
Yeah.
Not to encourage them to go into the business, but for them to have an understanding of, the business, the assets, and with that, perhaps the ability to contribute in the future as they sit on the board, or if they're off doing other things. Our daughter Leah was in London for about 4 years, so she would working in food tech sector space. When our importer in the London would have a tasting show, she would represent the family there. Our son was in Italy for 4 years. We were looking at some joint ventures with wineries in Italy. And so Lucho was our boots on the ground, so to speak, to visit the facility and taste the wine, so on and so forth. So they've kind of touched and contributed to the winery. And so that's how we started it. But we also encourage them, follow your dream, follow your passion. We don't want you in the winery when you graduate from college.
Okay.
And so both of them have followed their own dreams and passion, but are both engaged at the winery with different capacities.
And what about your nephews or nieces, if they're so with Mark's?
Yeah, similar thing there. Not one of them joined the winery directly out of college. There's only one, Rihanna, who is actually fully employed by the winery.
Okay.
She works in our DTC, direct to consumer, our hospitality retail room, tasting room is where she works, involved there. She did work in the industry for our distributor. She worked for our distributor in Florida and worked that market for a few years. Then she came on board with us as our employee, working in the Northwest United States, Washington, Oregon, that area. And then from there, ultimately moved down to the winery, working in the hospitality side of things. The others are engaged. Two others are engaged, similar to my kids. They have their own thing. One of them, actually, Mark's family has a small wine brand that they own. They manage, completely independent of Charles Krug, very small. So one of the girls manages that one. And then Angelina is the actually only formally trained winemaker in the fourth generation.
No kidding.
She got her master's at University of Adelaide in Australia, so a lot of international experience. So she has a very successful consulting winemaking business here in Napa Valley, consults with a number of clients. So we've hired her to do some consulting on Charles Krug and work with our winemaker, Stacy Clark, who's been with us for quite a few years, to really have that, family touch on the wine styles. Even though Stacy is very, very good at it, and it's just nice to have, say, you have the family involved and engaged in it.
Fostering relationships and having a shared vision. How are you motivating your nieces, your son, your daughter, in terms to say, let's get together and try to define a shared vision for the future? Because for what I hear, you're thinking of having these Mondavi Charles Krug winery for the next 100 years.
For the next
hands.
Multiple generations. We have the fifth generation. There's two members in the fifth generation, a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. So we're working towards that. We're actually engaged again with a family business consultant to work with the fourth generation on specifically on those issues. And Mark and I are pretty much out of it.
Okay.
And the fourth generation owns it. They do have some input from our CEO, and our COO as well, because they know him well and they're versed in family business stuff. But it's mainly, working with an outside family business consultant, defining things like, how do you come into the business? How does the next generation come into the business if you want to come into the business? Before that really hasn't been defined.
Okay.
So that's the idea is, working on a project like that, conflict resolution. Let's put a structure together because, I don't care how cohesive a group you have, there's still going to be some conflict at some point or another.
Yeah.
In family business. So, conflict resolution. How do we get through the tough times with the idea that we do it internally, put a structure together where we do it internally as opposed to relying on an outside consultant.
Had it helped having an outside consultant to tackle all these challenges as a family? First on the governance part of it, and in terms of the business, but now in the family side, has it helped having outside consultants?
I think it has. I mean, the initial one definitely has helped on the governance structure. We're right in the midst of the other consultant working with the G4s. Progress is being made there. I think it's important to have a kind of an independent third party moderator, mediator, pick a name, facilitator, pick a name there with the appropriate skills and background to help the next generation navigate the process. Because what we've learned going through various family business seminars and retreats, things like that, is our advantages we have, our challenges we have are really across all family businesses. It doesn't matter what the business sector is. For that matter, it doesn't even matter what the country is, to what limited experience I have there. But I think it's important to have someone to help moderate things.
So where is your vision, the vision of the family for the next 30, 40 years? Where do you see Mondavi, Charles Krug Vineyard in the future?
First and foremost, remaining family owned.
Okay.
That doesn't mean every family member is working in it, but family owned. And I see, a continuation of the next generations being owners as well. So that's the number one priority. And the other thing is obviously, a successful ongoing business that is sustainable for the family and future generations of the family. I see us still remaining in the wine sector. I don't see us at this point branching out to other, unrelated businesses. Let's put it that way. We're expanding. Up till now, we've pretty much been our own producer, marketer, seller of our wines. We're now, I alluded to earlier, getting some partnerships. So we're now importing and representing Valdo Prosecco, which is the number one Prosecco in Italy.
Which is delicious, by the way.
Yeah. And small sales in the United States, but we embarked on that about 2 years ago. That's the one that Lucio did the groundwork on, visiting in Italy. So importing, representing that, and there's other phases in there where we can produce some brands together. Perhaps a footprint here for sparkling wine production in Napa Valley. Ideas that are out in the future, but now we're importing, enhancing our portfolio, but still in the wine sector, because that's where our strength relies. That's where our distribution network is. So leveraging that.
How about pursuing in the hospitality sector? Because I've seen it several wineries around the world that say, we're going to try to make some hospitality things in terms of around the wineries. And here in Mexico, it's let me share with you, there's a lot of wineries now in the region of San Miguel Allende and in the middle of the Bajío part of central Mexico. And also in Ensenada, but most of them are branching in also into the hospitality, having lounges and hosting people and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point, and you do see that in parts of the world,
Yeah.
in Europe, well, obviously wine growing regions. We actually did embark on a concept like that. We partnered with a luxury hotel group
Okay.
who has a footprint in the United States. Not a big one, maybe a dozen or so locations. Family owned, family run, successful. So we partnered with them to put a luxury hotel spa restaurant on our property.
Wow.
Yeah, so it'd be 56 or so keys, it would have been. But here in Napa Valley, very, very challenging getting through the rules and regulations and opposition groups. So they worked very, very hard. We brought it to a vote with the community of St. Helena. So the winery, Charles Krug Winery, is in the city limits of St. Helena, small town, 6,000 people in the heart of Napa Valley. So because it was in the city limits, we could bring it to a vote to the community. And unfortunately, there was a few well-financed, vocal people that, the vote was like 30 votes off. Is like 820 to 850. So it got voted down. So so we're no longer pursuing that. But interesting you brought it up because we were trying to do that. There's two other wineries north of us by less than a mile, half a mile, are doing the same concept.
Okay.
Yeah. So yes, it's
like
happening.
a tendency of trying to pursue or bring the wine outside of that in terms of the hospitality sector.
Yeah, partly to diversify, but hospitality and wine go hand in hand.
Yeah.
I mean, it's rare you see, some great hospitality, fine hospitality without engaging with wine somewhere in the experience.
Yeah, definitely. I had the opportunity to interview last week James Ferragamo, and they have a couple of properties over in Italy where they have winery also and also a hotel, a beautiful hotel, 5-star hotel. So they're trying also to diversify themselves, not only as a shoemakers and apparel.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar. I mean, Europe is way ahead of California on that aspect, but we gave it a try. Other wineries are trying it as well.
Yeah. So to end this conversation, Peter, what would you make 3 recommendations to families that are hearing right now that things have worked for you that you say, something, this has worked for our family, try it?
I'll bring what's worked for our family and maybe things that we should have done, we didn't do that, but still worked out at the end. I think, first of all, introduce the next generation to the business in a way that they are knowledgeable, understanding of the business, maybe appreciate the business, not in a standpoint of, we want you to come into it. Just the standpoint, if they're going to be future owners, at minimum, they have to understand, what they have. I think that's the first thing. The next is when you get into multiple generations and expanding families, put processes in place to allow for communications, especially as it relates to the business, the family business, so they can communicate. There's transparency, what's going on with the business, with that family, to the degree needed, and also to allow the next generation to bond, outside of the business. So you don't want the business being the only thing holding or bonding the family together. Hopefully there's other activities outside of the business that can create a bond with that family. I think you always have to do, and every country is a little bit different on this topic, but you have to do your financial estate planning. So on the passing of a generation, there is not so big a tax consequence that you lose the business to pay the taxes. So you have to do that planning. But I think it's very important to do governance planning and put a governance structure in place. And when you put one in place, it doesn't necessarily have to be static. It may very well be dynamic from generation to generation, but you need a structure in place that you can work from.
Or adapt to the circumstances also, because things change.
Yeah. So, but so people change, so on and so forth. That's why you have to have a flexible structure. But without a structure, I think it's more difficult to, form for the next generation to formalize the governance aspect.
And finally, Peter, how are you tackling succession of your brother and yourself for the next generation? You have that in process? You're thinking about it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. From an estate planning, financial standpoint, gifting, all that, we're working diligently on that. And then really letting the next, we've been educating the next generation, but really letting them work, as I mentioned before, with outside consultant to put some of these governance structures in place. Too specifically, I mentioned is how do you come into the business? What are the requirements? What's the process? And the other one is conflict resolution, which I think are two pretty basic fundamental things any family business should put in place. But we've pushed a lot into the next generation. They're old enough now, smart enough, experienced enough to really take these, tackle some of these things.
Finally, and they came up with this idea. What about in-laws? What do you think about them? Are they going to be involved in the business or not?
They are involved to a limited. They're not excluded from the business, nor are they sitting in the board, so to speak. The spouses really I'm talking a G3 level, my level. They support the brand, and from a marketing standpoint, they will travel, do sales and marketing activities. So the spouses are definitely involved from that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like ambassadors of the brand and the family.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
Well, thank you, dear Peter. I hope to see you soon, either in Mexico or in Napa or someplace else, or maybe in Sicily this winter.
Yeah. Well, Alejandro, thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation to participate here.
If any of these resonates with your story or your company and would like to explore how to apply these lessons in your own family business, I would be happy to talk. Follow us on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcast. And share this episode with anyone building a lasting legacy, because generational continuity isn't an accident. It's a choice we make every day. See you in the next episode.